down the road, if you want to go further, we'll leave you to be the expert.
Yeah, I don't know about that. It's super interesting. I was pumped that we were going through it though.
Well, very cool. Well, let us begin. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Theology RX. I'm Josh Johnson. I'm here with Kyler and Kane, and we are here to talk about the Shroud of Turin. One of the few things in history that potentially could be connected to Jesus. And so our goal today is to explore the history of it, timeline, all the scientific research on it, and try to do that within maybe an hour, hour and a half, and just some of the cool things we explore. So you might see us refer to our notes quite a bit because I will tell you there is a lot of information. And so before we get into it, if you guys just want to share, your experience just digging into the research.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot. Like you said, I got started on this last Easter because there was a couple podcasts that had come out with that Jeremiah Johnston, Tucker Carlson, and then there's a couple other ones. I even think there was something on Sean Ryan. I was like, oh, this is interesting, and they bring it up. They're like, man, I don't know that I really realized what this was. And it was just really interesting because they were coming out with some newer information on it, and with technology that's increased, they've been able to kind of go through, which hopefully we'll go through and cover a little bit. But that was the interesting aspect of this. So I've been waiting for a year to kind of dig into this. I've been chomping at the bit. It's the whole reason why we started this podcast.
That's right.
So no,
This in the Ark of the
yeah,
not the Ark of the Ark of the Covenant, but
yep,
we also talked about looking into the evidence for Noah's Ark.
yes, yeah, well, some archaeological Indiana Jones stuff,
That's
right?
right.
So we'll sprinkle it in though.
That's right.
So we can keep our followers self-educated but not bored of our nerdy
True
aspects
story.
of our lives.
How about you, Kane?
Yeah, same. I mean, I knew of the Shroud. I didn't know all of the information until we started diving into all the research and the history and the timelines and all the tests and studies that have been done on it. So it's been extremely interesting going through that, kind of seeing the pros and the cons, or the skeptics versus the believers, and what that looks like. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah. So how we're kind of going to try to tackle this uh, deep topic of the shroud is we're kind of going to start from scripture and kind of go through the history of it. And now, when I say history, there's not a lot that's for sure documented prior to about the 14th century. And so the first part is really what's been handed down through legend. And then once we get into the more modern times, then we'll get into the scientific evidence. And so, in basically what from what I read and reread a few times is that um, according to this website, in the first century, and so this would have been just a few decades after Jesus, the legend and folklore speak of a mysterious cloth with healing power bearing the image of Jesus arriving in Edessa, which is now Turkey. And so from the time it was left in the tomb, which is recorded for us in the Gospels, to just a few decades later, maybe about 100 years later, it's showing up here in Edessa. And so one of the things I was thinking about is, I would not think of grabbing the cloth after Jesus' resurrection. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no way. Yeah, like where is he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, who would have grabbed it? I don't know.
Yeah, because from what we know, the ladies who were there, they didn't go in. They just saw, it open. Of course, Peter and John, peek in, go in, but nothing says that they grabbed the cloth.
No, and I think it says they saw the cloths laying in the tomb, but I mean, who would have thought of grabbing those cloths? So
Yeah, mystery. Here
Yeah.
it goes.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of many.
So it somehow makes its way to modern day Turkey, and so I mean that's no short journey. But then about the second century, in legend it seems to pop up again, and or eventually it's hidden in the wall of the city of Edessa, and I think probably some of that's due to the Muslim conquest, which of course would have been probably at least 700 or 800 years after Jesus.
Knights
Well, at least
Templar.
after I arrived in Edessa, because I mean that whole area kind of was impacted by the church, and Islam wouldn't arrive on the scene until until maybe the 9th or 10th century. I'd have to double check. But basically, it was hidden away to protect it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's forgotten about for about, I think it said about 400 years. And so about 525, it says here, severe flood destroyed. It's found again. I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier. It was hidden, but not because of Muslim conquest. That comes later. They have to go in and rescue it. I apologize. I'm getting all my information goofed up here. So guys, please go ahead and correct me whenever I make that mistake. So, but it was hidden in the wall after it got to Turkey. It's basically forgotten about for 400 years, and someone discovers it when they're fixing the walls of this building that they're in after it looks like a severe flood, and then it became not known as the Shroud yet, but as the image of Edessa. And it was described as the true likeness of Christ, not made by human hands. It became an icon of the early church. And what did you guys find as far as when it became an icon and the image that was kind of gaining some popularity?
I think for me, it's more about like I'd love to have the time to do the research. Not sure there would be any information out there, but this talks about that's the first true likeness of God or Jesus that they found, and then the image of Jesus and all Orthodox icons and paintings and murals and everything we have today changed based on what they found on the.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, because I know I found in my research there was a few coins and images that just seem to replicate that.
The Byzantine. I saw that as well, and they had made a Byzantine coin, and the likeness of Jesus with what we would think of today, more Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
Descent than the feathered-haired Americanized Jesus.
Yes.
So.
Surfer Jesus.
Yes, Surfer Jesus for sure.
And I'll try to make sure that as I'm editing this, so editing Josh here in the future, if you would make sure put in a picture of one of the coins that Kane referenced, and of course we'll make sure we get an image at the beginning of the shroud itself, because it's a 14-foot wide cloth, and it's just wide enough to wrap around the body. And they estimate the height of the person about 6 feet, proportional, and of course bearing the markings of Jesus, which of course for them to find this, and maybe they didn't know what it was, but maybe they unraveled and like, oh, this is what was rumored maybe all those years ago. I mean, who knows what the conversation would have been.
Right.
So it's exactly 14.6 feet long and 3.5 feet wide is what it is.
Yeah, so just enough to wrap. Because one of the criticisms that we'll see later is that in the scriptures, sometimes when Joseph of Arimathea is using, it said he's used strips of cloth. Sometimes it's used in the plural, and of course we just have this one, but there's also another cloth that's out there as well. That's sometimes translated as the napkin or another little sheet.
For the
it's
face.
And it's just about 13 inches by 21 inches, if I remember correctly. And what was interesting is that the blood and I don't know if the other perspiration, whatever it was, kind of matches the shroud itself.
And that would have been, according to my research, would have been placed on covered the face of the body immediately after removing them from the crucifix. And so it's interesting that it's Sudarium of, I forget what it was called, but it matches with the thorn markings on the head and all the different aspects of what Jesus went through in his crucifixion. So I thought that was interesting.
The blood type is AB as well, which is the same as the shroud.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the perspiration, bleeding of blood or perspiring blood. You can see the signs of that, like you were saying.
Okay, so it's found in about 525 AD. And of course, then as we just shared, there was coins. There's a lot of the images that seem to be based upon, or at least similar to the shroud. Then about 944, it says here the Byzantine imperial army invaded Edessa for the express reason of retrieving the cloth from the city which had fallen to Islam. So back to my misspeak earlier, they're in about the 10th century, mid 900s. Um, the Muslims had taken over the area, but the Byzantine Empire sends in an army to basically rescue and retrieve the cloth. And then it was eventually presented to the emperor. It doesn't really appear in legend until about 150, 160 years later, when Constantinople, which is modern day Istanbul, was invaded during the Fourth Crusade, and it disappears again. And some believe that the shroud was kind of held in secret possession by the Knights Templar, which of course raises all sorts of other thoughts and conspiracy theories.
That'd be a whole nother podcast.
For sure, for sure. And then since it's believed to be held by the Templar before it shows up again in 1356 when it is displayed in France, which I think, as far as the conspiracy theory, or the theory that the Knights Templar held it or somehow got a hold of it, kind of makes sense, because the Knights Templar by that time was huge in France, and they were noted to really be involved and relics and whatnot. And of course, you can get into all the conspiracy stuff too, but we'll leave that for another podcast. And so that's the prehistory, but once then it's into the documented history. So again, it shows up in France. It gets exhibited in Lyre or Loire, France. I'm not sure how that's pronounced. And then the evidence also indicated that the members of the De Cheney family were connected to the Templars, so which of course then suggests that evidence further. December 4th, and so very specific here, in 1532, the shroud is folded into 48 layers inside a silver lequery in Saint Chapelle, Chambéry, France. And so, as far as we know, the shroud kind of maintains its integrity until about this time, when there is some damage. Apparently, a fire breaks out and molten silver lands on the cloth's edges. And so, if you think about it, it's basically kind of folded up like a tarp or a sheet. So it wasn't on like full on display, but all of a sudden there's a fire, and then molten silver, which I imagine that has to be very, very hot, falls on there. And then it's then the nuns that were in charge attempt to repair it.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would want to touch or mess with something if I think
Right.
it's the shroud.
What's also cool is when you do see the pictures of it, you can see the burn marks clearly around the shoulders and then kind of where the knee area would be. But it doesn't touch the trunk, the face, any of the important parts that would be difficult to misconstrue.
Yeah.
Like it hits other places that are less, I think, important, right? When you start running tests and looking at things. So it's kind of one of those kind of uniqueness things. Like, is that meant to be?
Yeah. So when you see the picture, and again, we'll try to get that posted on there for you, is where you can kind of see the holes of it. That's kind of where that damage took place. But unfortunately, that's not the only time it gets damaged by fire. Let's see, when was that? That was just a few years later.
97.
97.
Oh, 97.
Yeah.
So
Skip forward.
a few centuries later. So it gets damaged. The nuns try to repair it, and of course, again, I think that's interesting. And then it changes hands a couple times. It falls into the hands, eventually to the King of Italy in the 1980s. But the Royal Savoy family kind of holds on to it from 1450 to 1982. But staying back to our early time period, it's now when the shroud arrives in Turin in 1578 that it's now referred to as the Shroud of Turin.
I
And
thought it was interesting when I was researching the Savoy family, and some of the research that I found said that they illegally purchased the
hmm
shroud.
yes,
So it wasn't an up and up deal, but they held on to it for, over 400 years. And
hmm
so I thought that was an interesting aspect of it, that the history and the
hmm
mystery that surrounds.
yes. Well, I think it's also important to note that during that time, especially from the Crusades to near the end of the Middle Ages, there was a lot of relics going around. Some might be legit, but there's also many people tried to pass off fake relics because there was good money in it. Because you want to have a tactile connection to your faith, whether it's a skull, which there's the skull of John the Baptist and others that are floating around out there. Of course, the shroud here that where some of the first leadership, as far as church leadership, when it kind of emerged, was kind of like, oh, this is just a forgery. This is just fun and fancy art. And so the controversy around it starts really near the beginning
Yeah,
of
1389
recorded
is that
history.
letter, which was part of what the skeptics are saying, that it was claimed to be a painted forgery, which we'll get into the mechanics of it. Which
Yeah.
we had technology now to maybe
hmm
prove that that's not necessarily potentially the case.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So arrives in Turin, remains there, and then during World War II, as it was about to go into display, there's this thing called the invasion by the Nazis, and of course you have the fascists of Italy growing at that time. And so it's kind of snuck and hidden away, and no one's really told about it. It's taken from Turin um, uh, to southern Italy in an abbey, and is hidden from Hitler basically in a small chapel.
Yeah, because he was asking about it supposedly.
hmm
Hmm.
There were questions from the SS
hmm
and the Nazis about very specific questions about the shroud, and we know Hitler was very interested in the occult
Yes.
and all sorts of different things.
Cult religious artifacts. The spear of Longinus, which supposedly is the spear that pierced Jesus'
Yep.
side.
Yep.
Yeah, that stuff in history,
Yeah.
Hitler was obsessed about those
That
things.
was some Indiana Jones stuff right there
That's
for
right.
sure.
That's right. That's right. So hidden away during World War II. And then after a while, it gets eventually back to Turin, where in 1997 another fire breaks out that threatens the shroud, and fireman Mario Trematore uses a sledgehammer to break out the case and rescues the shroud from destruction.
Yep.
And then it's the shroud's last public display was in 2015. Um, and then um, and then of course the only people who've really seen it since then are the scientists and the researchers. And so as that kind of covers that brief history, the research really doesn't get underway until was it 1898 when the first photograph gets taken.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Oh.
Yeah. Kind of the breakthrough there that really puts it on the spot there, because it's a different view of seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a negative as a positive.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you think of the old school photographs as positives versus the negatives. They had to develop them, and it shows like extreme detail through the photograph. Like,
Yes.
it just makes everything pop.
Yes.
Yeah, those pictures were kind of crazy to see the actual image of the shroud versus
Yeah.
the positive image, or which one is it? I forget which it is, but
It's a negative that shows up as a positive
shows
through
up
the
as
photography of it.
positive
Yeah.
in the photograph. That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, whenever you see the picture and you just see the cloth, I mean that's how it originally looks. And if you kind of see kind of looks like a negative, but of course it's a positive, as you said. That's what they saw after taking the picture,
Yeah.
and that really kicked off. It's like, okay, there was some history and legend around it,
Yep.
and all of a sudden it's like, wait, there's stuff within the fabric that we can see, and of course now that we have the technology, we can analyze.
Hmm.
So yeah, 1898 kind of kicks that off with the first, cameras that are available. And then 33 years later, 1931, they took more pictures, and it's like they found that it happened again. It wasn't just a one-time fluke.
And I thought it
or
was
whatnot.
interesting during that time, the photographer Pia Secondo Pia was the photographer that took it in 1898. The church like didn't believe that he was accurate or that he wasn't faking this deal, and he was ridiculed until the second photograph was taken by a different photographer in 1931.
Yeah.
So he was kind of vindicated at that time that, hey, this is what I found, this is what he found. So it's kind of an interesting deal. So
Well, when you think about it, anytime you find evidence or indication, people tend to have more extreme reactions to where, for me, even now, and again, we'll go through some of the evidence. There's still more curiosity than one way or the other.
Right.
What you think, Kyler?
Yeah. No, I think the photos themselves are just crazy because you look at the actual component of it and then you see these negatives which are positives, and it's really interesting to see as far as a lot of people will say this is artistic, and it's as we get into the science of this, that's where it kind of is very interesting. It's like, oh, how do you make something like this? And it I think as we get into it, we'll find that it's very difficult to replicate
Yes.
what's going on here.
Mhm.
So, which again just alludes to the mystique component.
So 1898, 1931, technology is still quite limited, but we're getting this photographic evidence. Then by 1950, Dr. Pierre Barbet, I can presume that's Barbet instead of Barbet, who's known as the doctor at Calvary. He was a French surgeon that did about 15 years worth of research on the shroud, and he, in his expertise in physiology and pathology, he looked at basically the crucified man on the shroud, and he deemed it kind of anatomically perfect. And so part of this analysis too, and as they'll see, and you can go and look at all the pictures you want online, is that the man in the shroud, he has all of the injuries that are consistent with what Jesus experienced. And so there are blood droplets, as Kyler referenced earlier, that match the one cloth, but it's right here. It seems like this person had a crown of thorns. There are nail holes in the wrist, nail holes in the feet, and also blood markings to where the spear would have also gone in on his side. And so, by 1950, be able to see more of what's going on.
Hemiatridosis, that's the technical term of the sweating of blood. I believe that's pronounced that way. But like extreme stress.
Yep.
So it's a scientific, true side effect, and that was found there, which again just.
Yep.
And I don't know if I'm jumping ahead in our deal here, but the other thing that I found was interesting is that when they studied the image that was portrayed on the shroud, the legs were not broken, so it was completely perfect, and that's not consistent with most crucifixions in that time. But we all know that because of what Jesus went through prior to his crucifixion, that he died on the cross before the two thieves beside him did, and they ended up breaking their legs to speed up the process. And so I thought that was an interesting factoid, is that and on the image of the shroud, the legs were perfectly intact, and so
Yeah, and that was prophesized that there would be no bone broken as well. And the Jews were trying to hurry it up because they had Passover coming up, right?
Yeah.
Well, the Romans, to make sure, allow for, burial, would have said, let's get this over with. And that's where, even Jesus and his burial was kind of done in a rush. As well. And one thing, I can't remember which article I read, but they said, the position of the legs kind of also indicated that he was still kind of in rigor when he was put into.
Yeah, it hadn't relaxed yet through the 3-day period.
Yeah.
And there was no sign, again, I'm probably getting ahead, but no sign of actual decay on the cloth.
Yeah, because there would have been some evidence on the cloth.
Yeah,
but
100%. Yeah. Yeah. What do you, that's pretty crazy. I mean,
Um, so yeah, more evidence. By 1973, Max Frey, a Swiss criminologist, he took some dust samples from the shroud. This contained numerous pollen spores, and he discovered 22 pollen species. And why this is important is that the pollen species that he found were original to Jerusalem, but also the route the shroud took up to Constantinople, which I think is pretty interesting as well.
yeah. Only in Jerusalem can you find those spores.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, because just like any parts of the world, and like here, I mean, you're going to only find certain plants
Yep.
right there. And so that's 1973, and by 75, just a couple years later, an Air Force scientists by name of John Jackson and Eric Jumper, using a VP8 image analyzer, which was designed for the space program, did some analysis, and they found that the image on the cloth was basically kind of like a 3D, like something you couldn't imitate just laying it down and painting or even exposing UV, that when the image was formed, it was formed around a body.
Yeah. Yeah. It had all of the angles and geometrical components that weren't just flat, which, I mean, I don't think there's a painting technique that you could do that or burn.
Yeah.
Because the other aspect, again, probably getting ahead, but they thought, well, they just laid a, a fixture of some sort of statue and then did whatever
Scorched
technique.
the
Yeah.
cloth or whatever.
Yeah.
But no area of that thing is scorched where the actual view of what Christ, if that is, Christ, or just the person that's there, other than obviously the burn marks from the churches,
Yeah.
right? But none of those areas have any singe to them at all,
Yeah.
and no brush strokes, like you said.
Yeah, no brush strokes, and yet that they look at so much, and so it's just crazy when I was reading that there's no way even today to replicate that
Not in its
on
entirety.
material.
Yeah.
And
Not
some
in
of
its
those things
entirety.
that they could test, they could do maybe in parts, but you could never do it together or
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
And so if we can't do that today,
Yeah.
my mind goes like, well, this is 2000,
Yeah.
potentially 2000 years old.
Hmm.
Oh. And then by 1973, the shroud was placed on public exhibit for 6 weeks. And then there's this team called STIRP, that stands for the Shroud of Turin Research Project, begin to do quite a bit of research on it. In fact, they use not only just the up-to-date stuff, but it was 30 scientists, and if I remember correctly, they spent 6 weeks. No, I'm not sorry. That was when it was on
5 days, 120 straight hours.
yeah, sorry. 6 weeks is when it was on display, but they had 5 continuous days, as Kane said, nonstop research. Can you imagine having that kind of access?
Yeah.
And all the toys to
Right. Well, that was in the 70s,
Yeah,
man. Like,
whatever state of the art meant in '78,
I know.
that's what they had.
Mhm. Well, and they did come to the conclusion that it seemed consistent, as far as the image, but also the cloth itself seemed consistent with being original to that time. Um, and and one of the other websites that I was reading, one of the leaders of STIRP um, said something to the effect that he believes his personal belief is that that's Jesus, but he's also a Jewish person, so he doesn't go as far as saying it's proof of the resurrection, but he's like his belief is like, yes, this is Jesus. Um, and so I thought that was quite interesting that he was willing to go that far
Right.
with it. Because I mean, of course, the whole Jewish argument back at the time is someone stole the body, and so technically that could still be in his mind, and within that lie. Of course, I think it's a lie because I think the evidence for resurrection's too powerful to say otherwise. But I could see in his perspective that maybe somebody wrapped him up, Joseph Arimathea and whatnot, but then someone took it off and ran off with the body. So I could see through his mindset. But the fact he's like, yep, I think this is Jesus.
Yeah.
That's still a really interesting thing.
Maybe he's a closet Christian.
So I thought this, just to wrap that part up though, but after they analyzed all that data STRP did for 3 years, their written report read, "We can conclude for now that the shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist. The bloodstains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin." I don't know. Kyra, you have to help me with
Nicely
that.
done.
The image is an ongoing mystery, and until further chemical studies are made, perhaps by this group of scientists or perhaps by some scientists in the future, the problem remains unsolved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Bloodstains appear separate too of the actual images.
Mm-hmm.
Those were soaked in throughout, and then potentially, as Jesus was resurrected, boom, his image just sprouted on the little tiny outskirts of that cloth.
Yeah.
But the bloodstains go all the way through, which you would think.
Yeah.
Cut yourself and put a cloth over it, it's going to soak through.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of, I think, again, it's just all these little things. You're like, ooh, this adds up to.
Yeah. It keeps getting interesting. Because I mean, even back when it was first, discovered, what we have in the historical record. Of course, the people who said, this is just a forgery, it's a fine piece of art. All of a sudden, with modern research, it's like, well, they probably had motivation to dismiss because there's probably, again, a lot of these items that were just coming out of the woodworks and made up, and probably took a glance at it, was like, oh, that's just, tea stained into a shape or whatever.
But there's no pigments and no dyes.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're like, how at that stage, early in the world, do you do something like that?
Yeah.
Without dyes?
Yeah. With the technology of the time, it just.
Unless the aliens came and visited early, right?
So after STRP here, I'll make sure I don't get too fast. Okay, that's what on my notes here that Kane just read that, so I'm not going to repeat it. So STRP, of course, has that conclusion, and then later it gets tested for carbon-14, the C14 test, which shook the community because there seems to be all this evidence leading up to this being authentic and genuine, and all of a sudden there's some evidence that says, well, this is probably a 12th or 13th century.
Yeah, 1260 to 1390 AD is what it came out as far as carbon dated.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is going to be tough. I'm from a science background, but
yeah,
I mean, I think it's important for us to really describe what carbon dating is to a degree, because I mean, I think there's some components there that I do think it's mathematically correct. Basically for just a quick overview, carbon dating is basically we all absorb it, and then when we die, we quit. And so then there's a half-life that starts to decay as we die, or as we're dead, and we start to decay. And they can measure it, and they're correct on, I think, the aspect of it's complete, the mathematical component. You can do some of that stuff, but then you start getting into carbon dating is accurate from 300 to around 50,000 years. Well, as a Christian, theologically, we know that can't be assumed.
Because what I read on carbon-14 is that the half-life is 5,700 years, but they can estimate to about 50,000 years. Yet there's a lot of environmental factors that go into it. And so if someone were to sneeze, touch, breathe,
any oils,
anything on it, I mean, you could potentially throw it off. And so I imagine you probably saw some of the problems with the research.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think it's just, I think it's, Kyler can probably speak to this more than I can, but I think whenever time you do a research project, you have a hypothesis and then you try to prove that hypothesis correct. And, whether that was their goal at that time or not, I don't know. But,
Yeah, and I think more information came out during that they tried to hide, which obviously if you try to hide anything, it's going to look negative on their perspective. There's potential that they took from some of what the nuns had done, which kind of lines up in that time frame. So there's your accuracy of maybe carbon dating helping to a degree. But, I think you said this really good. carbon dating it's inferred.
Mm-hmm.
It's on assumptions of what the atmosphere was like way back then, at the very beginning. And I think we all know that there's got to be some of those changes, whether it's atmosphere, we had humans living hundreds of years, not just maybe if we're lucky at 80 to 100. We had, I think, actions in the Bible, Moses raising his hand in the day lasting much longer than a typical 24-hour period per se.
Mm-hmm.
Did that change? I mean, this is getting deep, so forgive me, but we have the flood, and that I would guarantee you that most of these scientists were skeptical of the flood.
Mm-hmm.
But if the earth was covered in water, which it was, then there's going to be some definitive changes in atmospheric components of carbon and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
Just at it's a physical anatomical layer. So again, I'm from a science background. I don't really trust carbon dating as much. Sorry, take away my license.
As someone who studied biology, that made me actually look at carbon-14. It's like I got some concerns, and it was about I can't even remember what it was. I think it was something very non-consequential. But he's like, I've got concerns about carbon-14 dating. And I was like, this was somebody scientist, and was like, well, let me look, because of course he didn't explain why. It was like, oh, there are these things that impact carbon-14.
Yeah.
So just kind of summarize for you folks is that so they did this carbon-14 testing, and they came up on an average range, which of course from 1260 to 1390 on those dates. But what was found out later is that they did not report from the raw data that there was actually numbers that dated much, much, much earlier than those medieval dates that they made public, which of course arose to questions on their methodology, honesty, because as a scientist, and then you got to repeat, and of course, as you noted too, they may have tested parts of the cloth that the nuns repaired, and so then of course you're going to get some differences. And one thing that one of the articles noted is that as people were touching this thing, so even if you again have just fingerprint dust or something on it, could definitely impact a carbon-14.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that the numbers are wrong? I don't know, because for me, I don't know about you guys, I'd like to see some more testing.
For sure.
Not that I'm going to hold carbon-14 dating as gospel.
Yeah.
But I think for the integrity of research, it would be worth it.
I agree.
So
that's the big one, though, that is the biggest, I think, skeptical's viewpoint of this is the carbon dating comes back and it's medieval time frame, among some other ones, but that one's the large one, I feel like.
And they call it the medieval hoax.
Yeah,
is what they call it.
Yeah. Let's see. So that was 1988. So by 1977, Vinoam Danon, I'm not sure I'm saying his name right, but he's a botanist from Israel, a professor at Hebrew University. He confirmed a flower image on the shroud. According to this, he verified 28 different pollen species and plant images, and verified that they only grew around Jerusalem, and they only grew around Jerusalem in the spring, kind of just further supporting the plant evidence that was found on the shroud. Now, one of the things I thought was interesting, because one person said that the material of the shroud was not made in the style of of a first century Jewish textile product. Didn't give any note or evidence, or didn't refer to any study. But according to this, in 2004, a textile expert did look at it. I'm not going to even try to say the name, but looked at the stitching seam on the shroud. So this is a piece of the shroud that is original to it, went through the whole length, and came to the conclusion that it was the style of textile used in first century Israel, which I think is important, because if I can't imagine too many people in the medieval era would have been worried about being that precise.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what your guys' thoughts on that, but I thought that was kind of compelling to me.
Yeah, I think it just adds to the list of if you can get over the other things, I mean, there's a lot that fits the book of realistic expectations of truth versus the hoax narrative.
Let's see, 2004, 2011, European researchers from Italy with the National Agency for New Technologies took a 40-second nanosecond burst onto the shroud from a UV excimer laser. That sounds like that'd be fun to
Yeah.
play with. It was the first time any type of this test using light was ever done. Um, and then the opening paragraph says a team of researchers from the National Agency for New Technologies, Energy, and Sustainable Economic Development has found that the Shroud of Turin is not a fake, and the body image was formed by a sort of electromagnetic source of energy. And
They had that, they had that back in the day. They were just shooting lasers all around.
Well, one of the craziest things, I really went deep into this, that someone made the claim that an earthquake, I wish I could refer to who said it, but they said an earthquake unleashed some type of UV or radiation type into the world, and that's what could have caused it. At that time, I was like, what in the world? I've never heard of that thing, and of course, again, there was no reference to even that happening
Right.
any other time in history, which there could be, but I couldn't find anything tied to it. Let's see. 2013. So just a couple years later, this is 13 years ago. Padua University in Italy, some researchers there took a dozen samples from other linens around that age, and by that age, I mean ranging from the current era to 3000 BC. So I mean this was pretty extensive as far as testing the linen material itself.
Yeah.
And they were able to develop a predictable rate of chemical and mechanical decay, and they were able to estimate a date range between 280 BC and 220 AD. And so, of course, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus fits almost right in the center of that. So I thought again that was another kind of a cool thing just in the material itself, because even I think it was a few years later. I can't remember where I read it. I wish I would have taken more specific notes. But they tested against some material that was in the southern Israel at Masada, and it was basically the same material, or the same design type of material that was used at Masada. And so again, that shows like, well, that's probably bought from the same clothes maker. I mean, like we buy cotton shirts or polyester shirts, made in a certain era. It's like, oh yeah, this matches specifically. Let's see. In 2015, another Shroud researcher, Mark Antonacci, he published some more information in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. And he believed that the Shroud image involved a miraculous event, and its occurrence. He says its occurrence can be scientifically tested, which of course they've been trying to do, but there hasn't been for quite a while.
Yeah.
Because even the last couple tests have been with other things. They really haven't had their chance to
They're
get
all
their
hypotheses
hands.
if they could get their hands on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then by 2018, there was some blood flow tests that some people used on mannequins and volunteers, and they used that to the evidence they found, contradicted what they found in the clock. But then, of course, there was some more criticism on their methodology and how they did their work. And of course, news kind of took off with it and whatnot. But to create some, of course, more drama around the Shroud.
Well, and it went against Sturp's findings too, a little bit on that, which I think you should give a little bit of some weight there.
Yeah, well, it's just a couple guys in a lab were, 30 of the best scientists at the time. Some, that was their job, is to study, those types.
They got their hands on it. we're using mannequins over here. Like, might be a little hard to replicate.
Well, there's a lot of presumption, when things, because if you think about the napkin cloth or whatnot, was Jesus' head at an elevated position, was placed on there before it was laid down, or was he laying down?
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions that we just won't have the answers to until we get to ask Jesus himself. And then, of course, most recently, again, there's some more criticisms about the C14 tests.
Yep.
And the Vatican really hasn't been too open on any more tests. But I thought then in 2022 here, there was wide angle X-ray scattering, also known as WAXS, that was done from also other linens, because again, they couldn't get their hands on it. Oh, this is from the Masada material that I mentioned a little while ago. They found a match between the shroud and a piece of fabric from Masada, and the fabric from Masada dated to about 55 to 74, which would fit the time there was people there at Masada. And for those of you who don't know, Masada is just a fun fact. Masada was basically a fortress in the wilderness, be southeast of Jerusalem, where those who wanted to resist Rome and whatnot, that was kind of their Alamo, so to speak. And so it's a very important place for the Jewish people. And so, there's a lot of stuff there. You can actually go and visit there today. And so that 74, I think, is actually about the right time for when Rome came in and Masada was no more as far as a fortress for the people. So that's basically roughly the scientific journey that it's also taken as well.
So far,
it's been interesting as people have been trying to do research even when they can't get their hands on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it just goes down to that just that easy question: is Christianity real or not? Is Jesus the man of God, and Son of Man, and is it not? And some people, as they wrestle with their own, I think they, well, I'll be the one that disproves this, or I'll be the one that proves it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think God probably has a divine plan for that, but
yeah. So if you guys as you guys looked at the evidence, and just to make it fair, just so folks know, I gave them websites that gave just the facts, some websites from researchers that were very pro that it was the shroud, but also some websites from skeptics. It was like, nope, there's no way this is the shroud. And so, what do you guys think? Where do you stand currently?
Yeah, I knew you were asked this question. I think it's very hard to, and I'm probably biased to a little bit, just because I know this. I believe in this event, and I don't know. There's just there's a lot there, and I think the cool thing is that some of this has to be brought into, again, faith, like, because we don't have all the answers here, just like we don't have in our own walk with Christ and our belief in God, like that. That's where you have to put your personal endeavors aside. And so, I mean, I lean towards it being realistic. And whether we're wrong or we're right, we're not going to go down or up because of this belief, right? But I think it's just a pretty cool thing to think about. Whether you believe it or not, I don't think there's a huge discrepancy. I think it's more of just the way it comes out, and some of these things that we're seeing more and more, especially with better technology. I feel seems to be pretty realistic that this probably was on Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah, I don't know whether I believe it or not. As I've looked at this and I wrestled with this and tried to, I knew you would ask this question too, and it was like, do I believe it or not? To me, when I think about it, it confirms my belief in what happens at Easter time.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not this is the actual, shroud that was placed over Jesus' body, I don't know. I think there's a reason why it was protected and hidden away for hundreds of years, that armies invaded places to get their hands on it, that it's been so much I mean, skepticism and tests and studies ran on it. I believe there's a reason for that. I don't know that there's anything that can explain that other than the fact that it probably is the cloth. I don't. To me, it doesn't change whether it is or isn't. Doesn't change the way that my faith and my walk and the things that I believe occurred on Easter
Yep.
and the resurrection. But I think it's an interesting bit of history to study. But that's as far as I can go on it. I don't know. I think it's a matter of, they could probably do research on this until well past I'm on this earth, and they probably still wouldn't be able to conclude
Yeah.
it. Because as far as I know, there's no DNA to match the blood to Jesus. And so, but the thing that really, probably the biggest thing that I thought of as I did this research was the napkin that would have been placed over the face at immediately after death, having the same blood type as the shroud, and the wounds matching the wounds that we've read about in the gospel. And I think the other thing that I really picked up on was that on the Shroud of Turin, there are scourge marks and crucifixion marks of blood. And very rarely at that time, as far as I was able to find, did they do both. They either crucified him or they scourged him, and it was one or the other. And if I remember correctly, I think Pontius Pilate scourged him, hoping that the people would say, okay, that's good enough, and they wouldn't have to crucify him. And so the fact that this has markings of both makes me lean more towards this was probably the real deal. But,
Yeah. So as a lover of Indiana Jones, this is one of those things that, just, it's like, this would be really, really cool.
I know.
But just like you guys, I mean, my faith doesn't hang on this, whether it is or not. I mean, if it is, that is really cool. But as I said in the beginning, I can't imagine, taking the cloth. And of course, Scripture doesn't say anything about it. But again, it doesn't mean that no one did. I mean, I imagine Joseph Arimathea, since it was his tomb, is like, well, if he's gone, I'm going to clean up here. And maybe somebody's like, well, I'll hold on to that.
Yeah.
Who knows? But it's also one of those things like, the Holy Grail. That would have been somebody's Passover cup set. And I can't imagine any of the disciples being like, I'm going to keep this because of dinner. Because, of course, there's rumor that maybe, it was used to catch some of his blood while he was up on the cross. But again, there's no scripture support of that. And
Don't forget the spear.
yeah, the spear,
Roman spear.
I mean, he would have reused that, and he probably would have worn down the tip. So I mean, I can't say that this spear of Longinus is the actual spear.
Right.
But again, it'd be one of those things that would be kind of
that'd be
cool.
pretty cool. Yeah.
So for me, the evidence definitely, as I understand it, points in that direction that that it's likely. Could science reveal how God did it? Well, that's actually part of the point of science. I mean, the earliest scientists were Christians. Like, how did God orchestrate this world? Whether it's gravity, the Big Bang actually was found by a Catholic scientist, and so in essence, the Big Bang is actually when God started speaking. I can imagine how deafening that would have been. Anyways, that's just where my mind goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it'd just be really cool. But I just look forward to what they might find down the road.
I thought it was interesting that one of the biggest proponents of it being real, as you mentioned before, is a Jewish man. And there was a couple articles I read. One of them was like, 5 of the most common myths about the shroud. And he talks in there a lot about, as a Jewish man, I'm having to defend this to you Christians.
Yep.
And I thought that was kind of ironic and funny, but he made some really good points in there, and I thought it was very interesting. So.
Yeah. That's just crazy to think.
And the scientists can't prove the mysteries that are on the shroud, and I think that's one of those things where it's like, they can't even explain what it is or how it happened, and I think there's a lot of things that lead to that point of
just not being able to replicate to its full authenticity, even with today's technology. And you're saying that whether this happened at the time that we think it happened, or even the 1260 to 1390, we know we didn't have that technology back then. You know.
Well, and part of the legend discussion about the cloth, especially when it comes to during the Byzantine era, is before that.
Yeah.
And so I think that further adds a little evidence that the people who were dismissing it there in the 14th century and whatnot was like, well, they were talking about it actually 100 or 200 years before you. And so this can't just be something that's just randomly showed up on the scene from some caravan trader from,
Yeah.
Turkey or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it didn't show up in the Dead Sea Scrolls just randomly. Like it's been moved around. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I know that. It's fun to think about and then compare and just see potentially, just the glory of God coming through. Just a pretty important potential artifact that's in our faith and history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other closing thoughts?
No, hopefully we did it a service. I think it's a pretty cool, amazing thing to just look into. Encourage everybody to do a little research and look at it because it's just it's neat. It's neat to dive into.
Yeah, I felt like the more that I read, whether it was a proponent or a skeptic, forced me to read more. And it was like it's one of those things you just kind of kept diving into it, and then before long your head starts to spin. You're like, I don't even know what I'm reading anymore. But
Yes, there's definitely a huge rabbit hole in many of these things. So, for folks, listening and watching, so this is not the only special episode. Kyler and I, when we first started kind of planning out this, is like, let's look at the Ark of the Covenant because there's some speculation on just a small handful of locations it could be. Including a hut in Ethiopia, but also the Noah's Ark as well, and where Mount Ararat is, and is there a boat somewhere in the ground? So we're gonna explore some of those things, and of course those will be specials once or twice a year. But we're gonna get more into this as we continue this work, and we appreciate Kane for joining us, and of course you're welcome to join us in those special episodes too, because it's just fun to explore and just kind of talk it out as well. So. All right. Well, you want to pray us out?
Sure. Yeah. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity that we get to just wonder in the mystics of your power, God. Whether it's real or as a medieval hoax, we just praise you for the real true reason why we get to look into this, and that your Son Jesus sacrificed and took all our sins, Lord. That as we come up to Easter, that we realize and understand the true meaning of the power of that. And we just praise you for being able to get together and get to talk about these things, the freedoms to do it. God, thank you for bringing Kane along and letting them join our craziness, Lord, and let this just go out and maybe just stoke a few people, if you will. In your name, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, and God bless.